Pleased to be joined now by ESPN NFL Draft analyst Matt Miller joining us. He's fresh off his combine visit, just as we are, so we'll get into some of that, as well as one of his more recent mock drafts. Matt, how many do they make you do? Because we've been asking a lot of you and your ESPN colleagues, how much pressure, how many mocks you got to come up with between the start and end of pre-draft season?
We're very fortunate, Chris, at ESPN. There's enough of us now that cover the draft that you get to take a little break from the mock drafts. But I actually love them. So even I'll hop on Twitter and just be like, oh my gosh, Russell Wilson got traded. Let's do a Seahawks mock draft just to look and see how things are going to look for them. So I'm probably addicted to mock drafts at this point. They need to put me in mock drafts anonymous or something this offseason. But I think it's fun. That's the part of the industry that I do love. And I think it's appealing to those fan bases to where, even with the Bills, to hop in and say, hey, let's look at what the Bills can do. You got 7 rounds. How can we get this team over the hump? Or,
Right.
Looking at, a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars, how do you get that team in a worst to first situation, maybe like the Cincinnati Bengals were in? So I can't get enough of the mock drafts.
Well, why don't we start there with one of your more recent mocks, which had the Bills taking Jameson Williams, the wide receiver out of Alabama, who, as we know, had the ACL injury in the national title game. I believe this mock, though, was before the combine. Do your feelings about the Bills change to any degree where you might move off Jameson Williams, at least for right now?
I don't think so. I still believe that that's probably the floor for him. I don't think he gets past Buffalo if he's on the board, basically. I see the AFC, these elite teams, it's an arms race right now, really, between Buffalo, Cincinnati. Obviously, they have 3 great receivers. The Kansas City Chiefs, who are in, a team that also needs another receiver this offseason. So I look at Buffalo. Cole Beasley may or may not be there next year. We know how great Stephon Diggs is. Gabe Davis had that fantastic game in Kansas City. But I think everyone's looking now for that 3 receiver set that can really threaten defenses. Jameson Williams brings a speed element to the game that is rare. So with Josh Allen's arm strength, it's a perfect marriage. And I also think with Jameson, something we saw a lot this year was his ability after the catch to create from short catches. You can give him the ball in screen game. You can give him the ball in slants because he's still a physical route runner. So I look at his skill set, and to me, it's perfect for Buffalo. It's perfect for opposite Stephon Diggs. It's perfect because you can move him inside, you can move him outside of the formation. So there's just a lot of tools that he brings to the table. And yes, there's some needs elsewhere, but the Bills, I think this year is the time to be aggressive in trying to find that other elite offensive weapon.
And the only reason he's down there is because of his availability coming off the injury, right?
Oh, absolutely. He would be a top 10 pick, in my opinion,
Okay.
were it not for the ACL. And one thing about that, I know a lot of fans get upset and they're like, oh, we don't want to draft injured players. ACLs are 6 months these days. We're seeing guys pop back from ACLs faster than ever, especially from what I've been told. His was a clean tear. There was no structural damage. There was no secondary damage. So you never want to say an ACL injury is minor, but the surgery and the technology is getting so much better that it's starting to become kind of a minor, or at least a rehab that we know so much about, that it becomes a little bit easier.
Let's shift to the combine since we're both just back from Indianapolis. Maybe your biggest takeaways. A lot of people feel like the University of Georgia not only won the national title, they won the combine. Would you agree with that, number one? And then what might be some of your other takeaways from the week in Indy?
Oh, without a doubt, Georgia. I think you see why they won the national championship when I tweeted this out. I wish I could remember it off the top of my head, but they had a top 5 40 at every position on defense. And in multiple positions, they had, 2 guys. Like you have Devontae Wyatt and Jordan Davis. You have Quay Walker and Channing Tindall. So it's just fantastic what the University of Georgia had on defense. And no disrespect to their offense. George Pickens, the wide receiver, also tested very well. James Cook, Zamir White, they were loaded, right? That's why they're national champions. I think the second takeaway would be that this was the fastest combine on record. I know there's been a lot of talk about some of that is because the pool of players who actually participated was smaller. Some of it's because that new turf in Indy is really, really fast. But I also think it's just a fast group. And we saw that at defensive tackle. We saw it at wide receiver. We saw it at cornerback. And I think if you're a Buffalo Bills fan, that should get you excited because especially as we talked about, Chris, we get faster on offense, but also on defense. That corner spot opposite Trey White could be a premium pick need. That could be a round 1 or round 2 need. Looking at the speed of this corner class, when in the playoffs, you're going to see Kansas City. You might see Denver now with the receivers they have. You might see Cincinnati. Like you have to have some speed and depth at corner. Having 3 guys back there who are starter caliber is paramount to how defenses are built. So I think when you look at the secondary class this year, it's definitely something to get excited about.
Moving on to the big news from earlier in the week with, Russell Wilson going to Denver now, just what the AFC needs, another great quarterback added to the conference. There's like nobody left in the NFC besides a handful of guys. In terms, obviously, it stacks the AFC West in terms of quarterbacks. I'm curious how you feel about this, though, as it pertains to the Bills. We all suffer from Bills myopia here, but that move happens, and people in Buffalo are thinking, ooh, that's a good thing. Those guys can all beat up on each other in the AFC West, and, in the AFC East, where Josh Allen is still king, maybe this is a good thing if you're trying to secure home field advantage in the AFC East playoffs if you're the Bills. I'm curious how you might see that.
Well, I think that's very logical to say, the Kansas City Chiefs, LA Chargers, the Raiders and Broncos are going to beat each other up, and maybe they would come out, the 2 through 7 seed. I think the other side of this, all 4 teams are playoff caliber. Like Derek Carr is the 4th best quarterback in the AFC West right now. He would be the best quarterback in most divisions, right? It's very crazy. So I do think that there's some logic to that. And obviously home field in Buffalo is a great advantage, because the wind, because the cold, the fans are fantastic. So I definitely think that there's a valid excitement when it comes to that. And also I do think though that I at least believe you want to beat the best. The Bills don't want to back into a Super Bowl. Maybe you guys wouldn't care at this point, right? Maybe you'd just be happy enough to be there. But I think, you look at it and say, hey, we want to beat Patrick Mahomes. We want to beat Joe Burrow. You want to get a little bit of revenge on the guys that have taken you out in recent years. So I do think the AFC West is going to be fun to watch. I'm very excited as someone who lives in the middle of the country in AFC West territory. I'm going to try to get to as many of those games as possible, but it will be interesting to see what Russell Wilson looks like outside of Seattle. He didn't play his best football last year. So we'll have to see if this, new system and new weapons that it's not like he lacked receivers in Seattle, right? We'll have to see if this new system is really what he needed to get back to being a top 5 quarterback.
And then what is the domino effect from the Russell Wilson move here with the teams that still need quarterbacks? Obviously, this ratchets up the pressure considerably on them. We know Washington, at least according to reports, was hot and heavy after Russell Wilson. It didn't come to fruition. They still need one. Obviously, Pittsburgh has their situation. Indianapolis, what are they doing with Carson Wentz? And Seattle. So Seattle suddenly has to find an answer there, too. Granted, they'll have, the number 9 pick now coming back to them from Denver. So maybe they swing on a rookie, although the class isn't overwhelmingly impressive. So how much pressure is on these other teams now to get a bona fide answer in the wake of the Wilson deal?
Yeah, I think, you look at it and say, okay, one team, Denver solved their quarterback needs. Seattle, now there's another that has one. And like you mentioned, there's not a quarterback in this class that is a surefire top 10 pick. So I think it makes, the pressure on the Deshaun Watson situation, what's going to happen there. We should have some clarity this week, hopefully. But then also, you have Mitch Trubisky right there in Buffalo as a free agent, someone who a lot of people have been talking about. I heard more about Mitch Trubisky at the Combine than I did Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis or Matt Corral or Desmond Ridder. So there's a lot of excitement about him, right, in this year's class. So Jimmy Garoppolo, Mitch Trubisky, Jameis Winston, those are Marcus Mariota. Those are the names that I think are probably going to be talked about the most over the next week and a half as we get to the legal tampering period, which makes no sense. And then as we get into the actual signings, I think, a Garoppolo trade and then those few free agent quarterbacks who have starting experience are the guys whose names are going to be the hottest.
Talking with ESPN NFL Draft analyst Matt Miller. And speaking of quarterbacks, what is the future for Jordan Love now? Like, do you think the Packers, we'll have to see what the final structure of Aaron Rodgers' deal is. It was originally reported as 4 years. He's disputing that now. If it's 2 years with an option for a third, maybe they hold on to Jordan Love. I don't know. But if I'm Jordan Love, I have no interest in plowing all the way through my rookie contract without getting on the field. So if you're in the Jordan Love camp, are you asking for a trade? You got teams that need quarterbacks. I don't know that I put my best foot forward in that Chiefs start that I had last year, but still in all, I think a team might take a swing on him.
Oh, I think they should. And yesterday, the Aaron Rodgers news was broke, and I even tweeted, it was like, someone has to go get Jordan Love. And I really thought it would be Denver because of Nathaniel Hackett, because the connection there. Yeah. We quickly found out it was not going to be Denver. But I do think at this point in time, Jordan Love's only 23 years old. He's been in the NFL 2 years. Like you said, he's only had that one start when he had like 3 days notice that he was going to go play against a very tough defense, a very confusing defense for a young quarterback to kind of diagnose and uncover. So I'm not even going to hold that game against him. And the other side of it is you could say, oh my gosh, this guy can't get on the field. He's behind Aaron Rodgers, who's a back-to-back MVP candidate. So with Jordan Love, there's a lot of unknowns. And I think right now there's a lot of NFL scouting departments having the same conversation that we're having. When you look at Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett and Desmond Ridder and Matt Corral and those guys, you have to say, what was our grade on Jordan Love coming out of college? When he was coming out of Utah State in 2020, where do we have him ranked versus where do we have these guys ranked? And then you almost have to do like a Moneyball analysis of, okay, the cost to get Jordan Love, it's not going to be a first-round pick. It's probably not going to be a second-round pick. So if you have a similar grade on him, would you rather send a third-round pick for 3 more years of Jordan Love or spend a first-round pick on a player that we also know nothing about? So I think that it is an interesting question. My hope would be, just selfishly, I think I want to see guys have an opportunity. Like if you're going to fail, go fail. Do it on the field instead of, well, you got sat behind arguably the greatest quarterback of this generation and never got to see the field, and people just kind of moved on and forgot about you. I at least want to see him have the opportunity to prove himself.
Seattle, the question now is, Matt, is this a total rebuild or are they going to reload? Obviously, they shed a lot of cap restrictive contracts just by moving Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner, who they released. And so they have the wherewithal to sign free agents if they choose to do so. Your colleague, Adam Schefter, was on a program this morning and said, to his knowledge, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf are staying put, at least as of now. So that would indicate that they're probably trying to reload here. And then there are reports surfacing now they might be looking at Deshaun Watson, depending on how his legal situation works itself out. So what is your feeling on the direction the Seahawks go? They have a lot of draft pick ammo. They have salary cap ammo. It would seem to indicate they have the ability to reload if they want to.
I think so as well. And the other side of that is Pete Carroll's not that young. I know he's energetic.
He's 71.
He's right. This is not a spring chicken. He's not hanging out for a 5-year rebuild, right? So I do think I'm with you. On the surface, it looked like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a rebuild, right? Because Bobby Wagner's gone. But then you remember they drafted Jordan Brooks, who comped very favorably to Bobby Wagner coming out of college. It's like, okay, they were actually setting this up. And the trade of Russell Wilson, I think it did shock a lot of people. But as you mentioned, if they're able to get Deshaun Watson, if that legal situation is cleared up and teams are comfortable with him, you now have the ammunition to go get a Deshaun Watson. And you still have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. You still have, maybe they can bring back Rashad Penny at running back, who looked so good down the stretch last year. There are a lot of free agents on their offensive line, but we just mentioned they now have the cap flexibility to go after and plug some of those holes in the offensive line. So I think Seattle is one of the more interesting teams to watch to see what direction they do go. I don't think getting Drew Lock says a whole lot about their plans or their intentions at quarterback. I think that was a throw-in pick, basically. But we'll see what they do. I think they are fascinating. If they can't get a Deshaun Watson, then I think you probably do look at it and say, okay, John Schneider has to look at rebuilding this team because Jimmy Garoppolo, Mitch Trubisky, Marcus Mariota, those aren't long-term options. Those are stopgaps where you would go into 2023's draft where you would have 2 first-round picks, you would have 2 second-round picks, and you would have the capital, if you need to move up and get a C.J. Stroud from Ohio State or Bryce Young from Alabama.
Yeah. NFL draft-wise, Matt, we were talking for like 12 minutes about quarterbacks and free agency, and you're a draft analyst, and I'm not asking you nearly enough draft questions. I'm fascinated by the depth at cornerback, the depth at receiver, and the lack of depth, it seems, at defensive tackle, where the Bills do have a positional need. I know you mocked Jameson Williams, and that makes complete sense to me. But at the same time, I'm wondering now if the pool of top defensive tackles doesn't even get down to the Bills anymore because of the lack of depth. People are going to be jumping on the big guys early, especially after the combine that Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt had. I'm worried the cupboard's going to be bare by the time you get to 25.
It could be, like you said, the 2 Georgia players should be off the board, right? They may come off the board back to back to Cleveland at 13 and Baltimore at 14. They're that good. But I do think that you could look at someone like Travis Jones from UConn, a little bit more of a nose tackle type player, but he had a fantastic combine. Fedarian Mathis, Perry Winfrey are 2 other players, but they're probably round 2 players in my opinion. So I think that is where it sets up, as you mentioned, the depth at receiver, the depth at corner. If a player happens to slip, if Jameson Williams is there or Chris Olave from Ohio State at receiver, you could probably pull the trigger there and then, look through subsequent rounds to find those defensive tackles, because there's a big gap between Devontae Wyatt, Jordan Davis, and the rest of this group. And I think an interesting player for Buffalo specifically would be DeMarvin Leal from Texas A&M. He's a former 5-star recruit, flashed early in his career, but really didn't quite have the impact over the last 2 years that you would have expected to see. Had an okay combine, not great, and is a player that a lot of people think, oh, this is a first-round player. Teams I've talked to say this is a guy that'll be drafted outside the top 50, but has the potential to be a top 20 player in this class. It's just about unlocking some of those tools that he has.
And then at corner, Matt, they need one in the draft. They probably need one in free agency as well. Levi Wallace may have played himself into a very nice second contract that the Bills just simply can't afford. So looking at corner beyond round 1, perhaps, can you find, I guess the question here is, can you find starting caliber in round 2, maybe even round 3 if necessary?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this corner class is there's really one player, Ahmad Sauce Gardner, who's on a tier by himself. And then there is a little bit of a gap to Derek Stingley Jr., who hasn't played very well the last 2 years. He's just played in 10 games, has not had an interception. Then you get to a cluster of players that are very closely graded together to where, could we see a Kyra Elam slip to the, 20, or excuse me, pick 55, pick 60 in the second round? Absolutely, we could. Martin Emerson didn't run that well at the combine, so he could definitely slip a little bit. So I do think a smart way to look at this as a fan of the Bills is, how do you stack your board? If you get a receiver in round 1, what's going to be left in round 2 at corner? As opposed to if you take a corner in round 1, someone like Trent McDuffie or Roger McCreary, if you take that corner in round 1, which receivers are going to be available in round 2? So you have to really look at it that way instead of, hey, let's just get a receiver here, a corner here, and everything's set. You really have to look at the values and the depth at each position and try to piece together a draft board that way.
And then finally, with the receiver class, we know it's deep yet again this year. It's almost like an assumed luxury because receivers are coming out of the woodwork from college, and the cost of receivers in the league is exorbitant. And I'm wondering, because the Bills, Beasley's future very much up in the air. Gabriel Davis entering the final year of his rookie deal this year. And Diggs is someone that they're going to have to figure out an extension in some way, shape, or form going forward. Maybe not this year, but definitely next year. They need a guy that can come on the scene and contribute right away. Does the depth go deep enough if they pass on a receiver in round 1? Does the depth go deep enough where they could have somebody challenge for, a top 3 role right out of the chute?
I think in theory it does, but as you're saying this, so many teams have the same thought process. If we need 3 receivers, the cost of the wide receiver position is getting crazy. And Mike Williams is getting $20 million a year from the LA Chargers. Yeah. So that cost is going up. People see it as, hey, let's just attack the draft. And so as you see here, ton of players, ton of wide receivers available, but how many teams are going to have that same philosophy of, let's grab these guys early? So could John Mechie be available in the late second round? Absolutely, because of that knee injury that he suffered in the SEC championship game. But there's the other side of it. We could see a run on this position within the top 40 picks that 7, 8, maybe even 9 of these players are off the board by the time midway through the second round rolls around, and then you kind of get stuck. And I think that's where the Bills have to be careful, is you don't want to get stuck. And that's why, Brandon Beane and his staff, they have to be doing mock drafts to see, here's what we think about the teams drafting in front of us. Here's where we think some runs on these positions are going to happen, so that you don't find yourself sitting at 25 and all the receivers are gone, or so you don't bypass receiver in round 1 and get there in round 2 and any player with a starting grade has come off the board. So that's, the next 50 days are all about trying to figure out how the draft board is going to fall necessarily. Your grades are pretty much in at this point, right? Now it's trying to figure out how the draft is actually going to fall.
Super stuff, Matt. Thanks for the time and the insight. We appreciate it.
Of course.